Today's first encounter. My name is Gabriel Santos Cabral. I am 20 years old. My encounter happened when I was 6, turning 7. Back then, my family and I lived in the country in Londrina, Paraná, Brazil. It wasn't a rural property, it was more like a country summer house, but in the city. The property was just outside of the suburbs, in the northwestern part of the city, edging the city limits and nearing the country. It was approximately 420 square meters, or 502 square yard piece of land, surrounded by a 2 meter or 6.5 foot wall for more privacy. The house sat in the far corner of the property with a good view of the surroundings, 90 to 95% view of the whole property from the front porch of the house. The region, northern Paraná, where the city lies, resembles southern Missouri or northeastern Kansas, but it's tropical rather than temperate subtropical. The city is a metropolitan area with the population of 486,000 plus people. It would resemble Wichita, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri. The landscape is fairly flat with some hills. The scenery has little vegetation, with only some parks and nature preserves, none big enough to have a decent population of any medium to large animal species whatsoever. There are no bears in Brazil, and the largest predators found in the wild are the maned wolf, the southern South American cougar, and the jaguar, none of which really could be identified as to what I saw. My encounter was brief, but it was clear enough for me to make out the shape of the creature, its color, size, etc. So, on to my encounter. It was a Friday, October 18th, 2002. It was mid spring in the South Hemisphere. And that night there was a full moon with relatively cloudy skies. We had a dozen dogs on the property, which all slept together in a large kennel on the side of the house. They would be pretty quiet at night, but on that night they were unsettled and spooked. One of the dogs managed to escape from the kennel and was desperately trying to get into the house. I was alone with my mom, and she asked me to turn the floodlights on outside of the house to check out what was going on. I did that and went to the front porch to scan the area, trying to see what could have scared the dogs. Staring at the corner where we had a mango tree 90 to 120 meters away, I saw this large grayish creature running on all fours, avoiding the lights. It passed behind the mango tree and disappeared in the dark. As I saw it, I immediately identified it as being a werewolf, like that of the movie Bad Moon from 1996, but with a slightly larger head, thicker snout, and bulkier build. On its hind legs, it must have stood, at the very least, as tall as the property walls, 2 meters or 6.5 feet. I stand 1.74 meters or 5 feet 7 inches, by the way. I froze for a few seconds after seeing it. It was a brief sighting. It lasted 2 to 3 seconds, and as soon as I recovered from the shock, I sprinted as fast as I could back into the house, locked all of the doors, closed the windows that were still open. I was familiar with the werewolf movies back then. I was already aware of the impossibility of there being someone who could shapeshift into a monster. But what I saw was unmistakably similar to a werewolf. So, since that encounter, I started to believe in werewolves, only under the same concept of Dogman, which are natural rather than supernatural, and look the way they do 24/7, a term which I only came across recently. And that is the encounter I had with a dogman. Just like in the United States, where there are places where sightings are frequent, there are places in Brazil where they happen frequently as well. In US, it would be Elkhorn, Taylor, Mississippi, Marshall, Texas, and Brazil. It would be Juanopolis and Tres Lagos. Juanopolis has had sightings of werewolf Dogman ever since its foundation. Its first mayor was said to be a werewolf back in the late to mid 1800s. The town is filled with werewolf references. Tres Lagos has many sightings ever since the late 1980s, early 1990s. There was a series of nights in this small city in the 90s where people claimed that a werewolf was roaming the streets at night after dark, trying to invade houses, climbing on roofs and howling all night long, scaring people's dogs, attacking livestock. It really scared people. The state police began to reinforce night patrols and started investigating, assuming that someone was outside at night in a suit scaring people. Some cryptozoologists even collected DNA samples. As it turned out, it was not human DNA or that of any known animal, and it certainly was not artificial hair from a suit. Today's second encounter. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I'd like to be brief here, but I need to get this off of my chest. The nights here can be extremely loud between the crickets, tree frogs, and cicadas. It can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we had moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to the car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day, right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock about the size of a cantaloupe landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out that whoever that was about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to the front door. As soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me note back up to the front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I'm on the front porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something. As soon as she shuts the door, I hear that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back into the house. Now, at this point, I'm questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. This was until a couple nights ago. Fast forward about a year later, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn some money over the summer break for college. We're on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house, and I see two eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I'd made a comment that it's almost as if it had known I could see it, and it moved. The color was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrive at the house. As we're getting the bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son comes bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was wanting to help her carry in the bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at, my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up nights. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I have never seen anything with my own eyes. Even with what had happened a year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods. Directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard as it looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then, when it came out into the clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it had covered and the fact that when it was in front of its shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that I was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving quickly as it could while it was still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get inside the house now. I grabbed my son and booked inside. I grabbed my rifle and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me, but I still watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned toward the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she had seen. Her face was pale white. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep guttural growl. I asked her why she didn't come in when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now, at this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. And whatever this was, it cleared about 30 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind a car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the car. As she entered the driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and froze. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up to the porch. She said she could see this gray figure hiding in a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say is they looked like a dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean, dead?" And she said that the pupils looked gray, like the way eyes look when they go blind. She also said that it was really dark gray. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. I looked online in Tennessee, and the closest thing I could find was the Tennessee wild man, but that hasn't been spotted in Benton County. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more ominous. I have no idea what this thing was. Dogman, Bigfoot, who knows? Today's third experience. From August 2014 and June of 2020, two major events in Indiana. Candace, a nurse residing in Indiana, somewhere on the Ohio River, claims a number of bizarre occurrences. Between 2012 and 2013, she lived in an apartment complex next to a large field in a forest. She noted terrible smells, a mix of dog and skunk. August of 2014, she had moved further down the road, but still lived within sighting distance of those woods. While sitting in her backyard, Candace observed a pair of trees swaying in the field, though no other trees were moving. She then watched as dark gray clouds moved in. Two young boys walked down the road and wandered into some nearby forest. After 25 to 30 minutes, she watched a creature that was likened to a Bigfoot step out from behind a tree and vanish. A few days later, Candace, her grandson, and a group of kids, all between the ages of 10 and 13, from the nearby apartment complex, had gone to the woods to look for arrowheads down by the creek. While standing in the woods, Candace observed tall grass parting and watched as the black creature slithered on the ground. To her, it looked like the creature was lying flat, walking on its fingertips like a spider. It slowly approached her and the children. She noticed a second creature peeking from around a tree, though she couldn't describe what it was. Suddenly, the one crawling jumped to its feet. It stood on two legs. It was a massive creature standing between 7.5 to 8 feet tall. The kids all screamed in horror. She describes it as looking like a German shepherd with a brownish red short hair, muscles, tapered waist with human looking hands adorned with claw like fingers. It stared at them and turned and ran, as did Candace and the kids as well. Over the years, Candace, her grandson, and her neighbors all experienced glimpses of these creatures. Candace's strangest sighting occurred in the summer of 2020, June, when she was sitting on her back porch drinking coffee at 8 in the morning. She felt as though she was being watched, got up and looked around but saw nothing. She sat back down and looked towards the forest. Suddenly, a beam of light erupted out of the ground. A black figure stepped out of the light. She couldn't see a face, only a black outline of a hairy bipedal creature that she said looked like the silhouette of a Bigfoot would look. The creature stood there momentarily. It turned and looked in her direction. It then turned around and stepped back into the light beam and was sucked downwards back into the ground. The light immediately turned off. Candace claims to have photographed some of these oddities and uploaded them to her Facebook group. Almost immediately after, the photos were deleted from the group and someone accessed her cell phone and removed the images. She had lost everything. This was followed by friend requests from people she did not know. Tonight's fourth experience. This happened only a few years ago, spring, summer. I lived in Utah, and I loved exploring with my ex-wife and her stepson. We did a lot of geocaching around Utah to keep the stepson entertained. He was pretty young, 5. It gave my ex and I an opportunity to see what all of Utah had to offer. We had also made sure at least once a month she and I would go away somewhere and camp and hike and explore. You get the idea. So during one of our trips, it happened to fall on the weekend where my ex had her son. and I had gotten off of work early that Friday. So we made the last minute plan to drive down to Monument Valley and camp out there and then do some hiking in the morning. We had left that afternoon and didn't get down there until a little after midnight. There were no clouds in the sky, no major light pollution, and the stars as far as the eyes could see. If you haven't spent time far away from the city, you'd be surprised at how much light pollution prevents you from seeing. We checked with a hotel that was right at the rim of the overlook for the Monument Valley, but they were a little too pricey for us. So we pulled off the main road where there's this old, really deserted parking area that made a semicircle as it jutted off the main road. Completely surrounding that semicircle of red sand and carports were miles of sagebrush, rock, etc. There were no paths exiting the semicircle. Remember this. We had pulled in and had the headlights of the car facing the tent, and that faced the road. We laid down our tarp, set up the tent, got all cozy in our sleeping bags. We had two that zipped into one massive sleeping bag and went to sleep. Right around 3 in the morning, I got nudged awake by my ex, asking, "Do you hear that?" To which I said, "No." And then that's when I heard two things outside of the tent. I completely froze up because then I saw my ex's face and it put chills down my spine. She had apparently been awake for about 10 minutes before me because she had heard these things fighting. When I finally realized what was going on, that's when I heard them fighting too. It sounded like two dogs the size of bears slugging it out. They made noises that I'll never forget, like the deepest guttural dog like human growls or gnashing of teeth. The two things, I presumed, heard me loosen my buck knife that I always kept under my pillow because they immediately stopped fighting and started running around the tent. I could hear their deep breaths and powerful feet hitting the ground. Then they immediately sprinted off toward the road. Remember where the car was facing, sagebrush to the east of the sand semicircle, main road to the west, and started attacking each other. That's when I hear a horse snorting roughly 3 feet away from my head. I hadn't heard a horse walk up or make any noises. It was suddenly just there. You know that feeling you get when you just know something or someone is looking at you, even though you can't see them? It was that, plus the overwhelming sense of dread and sheer terror. Well, even though it was spring and summer, we left the rain fly on just in case a random spring storm, so I couldn't see through it, nor did I want to even move because I was afraid it would try to get inside the tent. So I slowly unsheathed my knife and turned on my back, and that's when I heard this horse trying to open the car door. I could hear it snorting like a horse does randomly as it flicked my door handles. I could hear it start at the passenger side and then work its way around, flicking each door handle until it had gone around the vehicle twice. Once it gave up on the doors, it came to the tent. Here's where I accepted that we were going to die. I've had some paranormal stuff happen to me that spooked me. I've seen scary movies, but I've never been so scared that I literally felt all the will to stay alive just leave. I had accepted that this evil was here to kill me, my ex, and my stepson. Words seriously cannot explain how much dread was in the air. It was so heavy and drowning. After what felt like an eternity, this creature got up, walked away from our tent towards the east, toward the sagebrush, and the dog things had left. That was it. Nothing. So at first light, as I did not sleep for several hours after this, my ex and I immediately opened the tent and started looking around at what was outside. I saw hoof prints around the car, and then they led into the sagebrush and literally disappeared. like there were zero tracks of any horses once the footprints entered the sagebrush. We found the dog thing tracks, and then she and I both saw they were indeed not dog tracks. These tracks they left in the sand were about the size of my shoe, size 11 and a half American. These were unnaturally large. I've seen bear prints this size, but no dogs. Hell no. We packed up and got out of there as soon as we had everything torn down. We snapped a couple photos and then immediately took off. And tonight's final experience. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. The park had a Sioux burial mound about a half a mile from our spot. After fishing for a better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put a clip light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glimpsed ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where I had seen these fireflies. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf and unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because its eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down but didn't make a sound. My friend yelled at it to try and scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back in a mimicking voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things. So I yelled at it again, and it responded back in the same volume, same pitch, exactly same voice. At this point, we realized this was not an animal. We both continued on the path in silence as I maintained eye contact with this creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods, and I could no longer see its eyes. We made it back to our vehicles, and the same sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear it talk back to me?" And she said, "It sounded like my voice when it responded back to us." If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I'd imagined it. We went over what happened, and our stories were the same, except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend, who was Hmong, went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience for several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described my experience and asked for a spiritual cleaning of my own, it was said they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contacted the management of the park. They said the park we had went to had an ancient Indian remains scattered along the river that were unmarked. They said there were more Indian remains in that park than any other park they had managed. Let's end it with this bonus. I've never really believed in this stuff, to be honest, and I still don't know if what I heard was a skinwalker, a goat, or a person, but it still freaks me out. So my family lives on about 5 acres of land. To our left, we have neighbors who live on a hill on about 10 acres. And to our right is a huge barn where a guy who owns big construction company stores some of his equipment. The barn is probably a good 90 yards away from my family's home, and there is no street lights or lights at all between my house and the barn. So when this barn first got built, I was about 15 and my little brother was 13. His name is Bryce. We were both pretty interested in it because it was huge and at this time completely empty. So, with no plan, we decided it would be a good idea to just go and check it out at 3 in the morning. Terrible idea. We walked down to the barn with our Great Pyrenees, who is an absolute unit. Her name is Piper. The walk to the barn wasn't scary, and we made it there without anything happening. The barn is lit all around, so you can see everything around it from about 20-foot radius. So me and my brother are just walking around, and we brought a football, and we're tossing it and having fun. I remember shutting Bryce in the porta potty door and not letting him out, and just having a good time. After 7 or so minutes, me and my brother are both in front of the barn on a gravel path just talking, and we hear this noise pretty far off in the distance. It was a very weird noise, though, like a girl saying, "Hey," but very strangely. Me and my brother both stopped talking and look in the direction of the noise. It wasn't really scared at this time. It was a high pitched noise, and it didn't sound like it came from something menacing. It was pretty far away as well. So it's completely silent now, and me and my brother are just looking into this dark abyss. 30 seconds later, this noise is about 10 yards away. I mean, it was right side of the lit up part of land, so we couldn't see it, but it was right there. It sounded like a woman yelling, "Hey," in a panic, but it also didn't sound human. It was absolutely terrifying. I turned around and booked it, yelling, "Holy crap, holy crap," and just absolutely surged with adrenaline. So was my brother. It was absolutely the fastest I have ever run in my life. As I'm running, I hear, "Hey," 2 more times. I look back and there's nothing in the lit up area. I have no clue what it was. Possibly a skinwalker, but I don't know. I thought I'd throw that skinwalker story in for the fake skinwalker in Amarillo, Texas, the hoaxed. I made a video about it and I'm still getting emails from people who apparently haven't seen the video. Um, the more I look at the pic, the more I'm saying, where's the rest of the video? Why aren't they sharing that with us? I really think it's a way of drumming up business, like I said in the video. It's perfect for everybody. Hey, you think there's a critter, there's some sort of unidentified critter in Texas. Let's go down there. Just kidding. I'm not being mean about that voice. I just wanted to be funny. But like who in God's honest, it must be like public relations. I know how we can get more business drummed up. Let's have Ralphie here dress up in a skinwalker costume, walk around with a shovel or a crowbar in his hand, take a picture of it, say we saw it on our video camera, only air the picture, no video. People come in droves looking for the creature, and then they'll come in our zoo and spend $100 a visit and look at our dumb animals. Let's do that. Come on. That sounds reasonable to me, rather than a skinwalker that doesn't belong in Amarillo, Texas, because there's no Navajo land. And I know people are, doesn't have to be just Navajo to be a skinwalker. Yes, it does. It can be something else. Other native cultures have something else. The Ojibwe have the bear walker, but it's not a skinwalker because skinwalkers is just Navajo. So it'd be something else. So if someone wanted to be, legit on it, they could figure out what native tribe was in that area, and then look into a shape-shifting black magic shaman that turns into a demonic hell being, and call it at that, not a skinwalker. Now Amarillo Zoo is ruining native lore and cryptozoology for us, like Reddit and creepypastas have, and Facebook stupid groups. So, I mean, come on. Man, I cannot wait until Ralphie comes out and says, "It was me, they paid me. I didn't mean to scare you." No one's scared, Ralphie. Your legs look like chicken legs. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.